Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are, 6 minutes late, and we'll explain why in a few moments. Welcome to the Tech Town Square with my co-host, James Azar, Eddie Doyle, myself. We are looking forward to bringing you some really exciting dialogue today. So please jump in, comment, let us know your thoughts. All of our thoughts are our own thoughts and do not represent any company that we might belong to or affiliated with. Let's get that one out of the way. And now let's have an amazing Tech Town Square discussion. James, you want to kick us off? Because I think we've got something really exciting to talk about this week.
So we do. We have something very, very exciting to talk about. So we were about 5 minutes late, which is uncharacteristic of us as a show. So
My fault.
We want to apologize. We had a little technical difficulties, but we got it resolved. For those that are watching us on Facebook and YouTube, you obviously saw us come live. And then we kind of ended the stream and had to come back. So we do apologize about that. But sometimes technology is just not as reliable as we'd like it to be.
Or it can be a user error.
I'm not going to point any fingers, man. I'm just going to say we had technical difficulties. But today we're going to talk about China and hackbacks. So last week we talked about Microsoft Exchange and some of the stuff that went on there, and we talked a little bit about policy. And today I've kind of prepared something a little bit more on the idea of deterrence and retaliation. So sources from the White House are leaking that we could potentially be looking at direct response to the recent cyber attacks that have taken place by China and Russia. Today, President Houseplant, aka President Biden, came out this morning and said that he called Putin a murderer, and he will pay for his actions for interfering in the 2016 presidential elections. And Russia has now recalled their U.S. ambassador back to Moscow for consultation. And so we're looking at the geopolitical landscape have a direct effect on our operation of cybersecurity professionals and how it's going to impact us over the long term. And so today we're going to talk about, is hackbacks the right approach? What is deterrence? And what should the president, Congress, Senate, and the elected officials, including our highly paid diplomats in diplomatic missions, be doing to address the cybersecurity challenges that exist within our ecosystem? Here we go, folks. We got Miguel saying, hola, Miguel. Buenas noches, señor. ¿Cómo estás? You like my Spanish, right? It's pretty good.
I can go in French.
Voilà. Je m'appelle James. Comment allez-vous, monsieur?
Ah oui, faut pas penser aussi, je sais. Yeah, exactly. So, ladies and gentlemen, what's super interesting is when we talk about China, we need to. I always feel remiss that I feel like I have to do this, but in 2021, you kind of have to do this because there's kind of the woke culture that forces you in that direction. But there's a little bit of truth to anything that, is really spoken, right? And so I've got a lot of Asian friends, and there's a fair bit of racism and aggravation given the COVID-19 issue that has happened in the last year against Asians in America, which I think make up about 5% of the population. We are talking about the Chinese Communist Party. We're talking about dictators. We're talking about people who, and let me remind you, so this is who we're talking about. When China built their high-speed train from Shanghai to Beijing and tested it out, fully loaded with people, and it crashed, do you know what they did? They just buried it with all the bodies still in the train. They just buried it. They buried the whole thing. This is what this kind of dictatorial government can do. Now, it was since found out, obviously, because it's like, where are my relatives? It's like the audacity of these people, and they had to dig it back out, and then the news got out. This is the kind of regime we're talking about. And if they're prepared to do that to their own people, we want to discuss what they are doing in regards to industrial espionage, what they're doing in regards to building up their military, right, and their cyber capabilities. And then, of course, we can't help. And James, I didn't actually hear that about our president calling the president of Russia a murderer today. I didn't catch that one. So we're going to have to include that in the town square today as well.
Yeah, so we're apparently like laser focused on Russia. Not to say that Russia isn't an adversary, but Russia's adversarial goals and threats. We're cyber folks. So if we look at risk assessment, right? Let's just use basic risk assessment. Who are you more afraid of? The nation that's in dire economic need with a dictator that's been running it for the last 20 some odd years, who's got massive protests in the streets and can't seem to quiet those down, or the country that took over another sovereign territory, is building the largest navy in the world, is second to your economic power, and is threatening another nation and financing two rogue nations and two rogue countries.
Which is the second one?
Globally.
So obviously financing North Korea. Who's the other one?
Iran.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right. So who's in your risk assessment? Who ranks higher?
Yeah. And I wonder if Russia's proximity to Europe and NATO and the sort of pressure from the example of democratic countries that Russia is a lot closer to than China. China's really isolated, right?
It's negative. China shares a huge border with Russia. China shares a border with India, who's a very strategic ally of the U.S. China shares a border with Pakistan and Afghanistan, and China shares a border. I mean, if let me pull up the map. I mean, why delay this any further, folks? Let's pull up a map.
And then you've got this big Pacific Ocean that also sort of isolates them in that regard. And so I would think the protests that are going on in Russia are due to the fact that, people travel a lot from Europe to Russia. You had the Berlin Wall come down, how many years ago? It was 87, wasn't it? So, a fair while ago, almost 40 years ago. And so, yeah, that former empire and dictatorial control and the savagery of Stalin is crumbling. Not so with China. I think, in fact, China's getting stronger in their dictatorial regime.
Well, China's dictatorial regime was, if you play ball with China, will allow you to become the middle class. If you don't play ball with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, then we enslave you and we put you in places where we don't let media come in and no one has access to you. And you will work and do what we tell you to do until we deem you expandable, at which point we will, eliminate you. I'm launching Google Earth here, so we'll look at that in just a minute.
But what I find interesting about that is exactly what Stalin did on the back of the devastation of World War II. And yet they crumbled in the end, right? The 80s really finished them off. Reagan applied a lot of pressure to them in the late 70s and 80s, and then they're done. That didn't happen in China. And I'm wondering if it's the isolation, because they share a border with a communist country, Russia, and the Pacific. And, while India is an ally, it's kind of not a strong democratic kind of, let's export Levi jeans and Mustangs country, right?
It is. India is very much capable of being an economic superpower that could challenge China. That was part of the TPP that President Obama was working on before President Trump pulled us out of it. But if you take a look here, I'm going to pull up Google Earth here in just a second, but China's not as isolated as you seem to think, Eddie. I hate to break it down to you, but that's really not the case.
Certainly don't hate to do it. Let's learn. Let's have this town square, because I'm still. It's not that I'm going to dig my heels into my point. So what I'm trying to get to is this: why did Russia crumble and China hasn't? They've been communists for similar amounts of time.
So I can actually explain that. We actually studied that in Intel school. So here's China, by the way. And so if you take a look, China shares a huge border with Mongolia, North Korea. South of China, you've got the huge border with India, the border with Russia, which is right up here, this whole area right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse.
Yeah.
This whole area up here, this is all Russia and Siberia.
Yeah.
And then as you go further south, they share borders with Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, Bangladesh,
I'll be a little
Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and so and this is right here where they're keeping all the Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps right now.
So I'll put it a little crudely. Europe had a renaissance. I think the impact and the flow of beauty from the Renaissance into Russia shows the Russian people we could have something better. East and West Germany really proved that out for us. I suspect that's why they crumbled, because the people wanted to make it crumble. China, the people literally have no idea.
So I'll tell you why I think the USSR crumbled and why China isn't.
All right.
China is controlling China. And so they're not really ruling other nations per se as part of their communist regime. It's their country that's broken down into different provinces, and that's what they're doing. On the other hand, Stalin and the USSR, they occupied parts and nations that had a history before the Soviet occupation.
Yeah, right.
Bulgaria, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. You know, those were all independent nations who strived for freedom and wanted to seek it, including East Germany. You know, you've got Poland.
So they rattled the chains enough that they broke up the empire. I mean, people always think that running an empire means you kind of rape and pillage and you get all this wealth. It's actually not the case, right? It's very expensive to run empires.
Well, and also when you're trying to rule other nations, right? China, that's not the case. China is running China. They're not running anything else. And they're meddling in foreign countries economically. They're not really meddling politically, which is the big difference between, for example, what Western nations do in foreign nations is we say we don't interfere, but then we operate intelligence agencies and diplomats in those places to really, you know, create an interest for the country, while China says, here's some money, sign on these draconian contracts where we're going to end up owning everything we build and end up owning your country. But hey, sign it now and we'll give you this money. And we don't care how corrupt you are. And we'll do stuff that's good for your people. But you're going to have to hire Chinese labor to do the stuff. You can't even bring in your own people to do it.
Yeah, these predatory loans. For the listeners that might be somewhat unfamiliar with this, what China's done, I think, especially in Africa, a lot of Asian countries as well, but especially Africa, where there are cobalt mines, nickel mines, you know, these kinds of resources. They've gone in, looked for countries and organizations which would have perhaps a tougher time paying back a loan. Also, knowing that there is enough resources to hedge their bets, and then they loan them massive amounts of money. And as James says, they also have a economic interest in flying their people there to work. Actually, as an example, with the COVID virus, the massive outbreak in Europe that occurred in Italy, it was in the Milano district, where the fashion district is, because there's a massive textiles plant. And there were direct flights from Wuhan to this city. I can't remember the name of the city. It might actually have been Milan where they were flown into. And they were still flying those direct flights even after COVID had well broken out. And even after they had locked down Wuhan itself, they still had flights going that way. Hey, look, if they're going to bury a train of their own citizenry, they're not having a problem doing this. All right. I think you're right on that one, man. Yeah, Russia had an expansionist empire.
China's expanding it by enslaving people to through the economy, because they don't have the military might yet. So imagine when they have the economical power, and in 5 to 10 years they'll have the military might. Then imagine what that would be. We don't have the money to pay you back, China. We're not going to honor the contract. Sue us. And right. China says, well, we're not going to sue you. We're going to just send our naval ships in, and we're just going to bomb the living crap out of you.
Right. I wonder if that'll happen.
Right. But we're talking a little bit about hackbacks here. And so there's this kind of approach of wanting to change the battlefield. And there's a huge discussion around the idea of hacking back. And what people don't know hacking back means is You hacked me, I in turn hack you back. And theoretically, you go, what's wrong with that? Slap me, I slap you back. Kick me, I kick you back. Shouldn't we be doing that? Well, theoretically, yes. But in cybersecurity, the challenge that we were witnessing, folks, is the following. When we hack back, they're not hacking our military. They're really targeting us, the civilians, and the businesses.
Yeah, when they hack us, not when they hack us back. You mean when they commit the original crime?
The original crime is business, but then the retribution is also going to go to business. They're not going to hack the government.
So the retribution from us going to other businesses?
The retribution to us, to China or Russia or whatever threat actor, would be to attack part of their critical infrastructure or something embarrassing.
Offline, that kind of stuff.
Right. But then their retaliation would be against civilian infrastructure again. Yes,
now I see what you mean. That's right. Their retaliation back again as we continue this ping pong game.
Correct.
Right.
And you look at what the Biden White House has done. They've done a few things this week that I think are very important and very positive. One, the FCC and Homeland Security continued the ban on Huawei to be used in 5G network or any network. That also applies to ZTE, to Hydra, and a few other Chinese organizations. I think that's significant. That's a great move by the FCC and the Biden White House to really continue that. That shows a little bit of bipartisanship and a little bit of a joint goal in really slowing down China's ability to infiltrate our infrastructure.
Okay, I'm just Googling something on Huawei right now as we're chatting here, because I remember that GCHQ, the British equivalent of the NSA, and I was going to look this up and didn't, used Huawei on their perimeter. That might have changed. The fact that they did at one point is a really big deal, because, so I'll fact check myself just after I'm talking, when James starts talking again, because there was a very famous case of the deputy head of MI6, which is the Brit equivalent of the CIA, Philby, Kim Philby. Turns out it was a Russian spy. He was a good old boy Englishman, went to all the right prep schools, Eton and all that. The Brits love that. They lap that up. You go, oh, you went to Eton, you know the Queen, you must be one of the club. I mean, really, I'm being sarcastic, but that's kind of how it was. Kim Philby, this was in the late 60s he was discovered, maybe early 70s. It was discovered that he was a Russian asset. He managed to evade prosecution and escape back to Russia, where he, in the end, when he died, received a massive state burial. One of the biggest perpetrations of the British intelligence system in history. Now, what that did, understandably, is caused the CIA to say, hey, we've been sharing all this information with you guys for the past few decades, since World War II. He's been taking all that and giving it to Russia. This was at the height of the Cold War, a massive betrayal. And it caused a distrust between the Brits and the Americans, which has since not yet been fully repaired, understandably. My point here is that now you have GCHQ, equivalent of NSA, using Huawei equipment, certainly on their perimeter. And I'm just going to fact check myself to see if that's still the case. All right, it's coming here. So October 2020, GCHQ discovered, this is in news.sky.com, discovered nationally significant vulnerability in Huawei equipment. The issue in Huawei's equipment was initially withheld from the Chinese company and not reported due to security concerns. Doesn't actually see whether they dumped them or not. That's a October 2020 article. Another one from BBC, Huawei failed to improve UK security standards. It can influence other nations, weighing up the use of Huawei's kit. The report said that that GCHQ's National Cybersecurity Center has seen a limited prospect. Okay, it's saying the company Huawei now has limited prospects in the UK. Not sure exactly what that means, but doesn't make it clear that they gave them the boot, which I think they should. Another one from Reuters, disagreement over China's Huawei technologies do not Do not pose a threat to Five Eyes Alliance. Okay, the Five Eyes Alliance again. This is Australia, Canada, the US, England, and another one.
New Zealand, US, Canada, and New Zealand.
New Zealand, yeah. They're saying it doesn't pose a threat. Why take the risk? This is what bothers me, though, right? Is that why even take the risk? There's plenty of other technology out there, right? Cisco, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't get it.
So I think part of it has to do with cost. Some of it has to do with a little bit of politics. We know that the China threat is absolutely 100% real. And we know it's real because, well, we see China's malign activities, and we understand that we need to address those. And I think now comes the time where we talk about, the deterrence. And we kind of spoke about that, I think, last night on Clubhouse, right, Eddie? We kind of talked a little bit about deterrence, a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. And kind of talking about it is critical, because I think that's where most people are really blind to the fact that we need to start addressing China with really hitting them where it hurts. And so, being that we're China's largest customer, I think the best way to approach China right now is to really knock them on the head as their biggest customer.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and so there's a comment, do you live in the crapper? I'm not sure if that's just a troll comment, in which case we'll toss you out, but it might be something that you're just kind of like, you could use better English there, my friend. But what was it that I was talking about when you made the comment? Maybe bring that back up, because I love disagreement, right? I love it if you think I'm saying something that's just like, hey, man, this is much more serious than you think, Eddie. I'm just not sure where that comment references. So if you've got something super intelligent to add, please add it, LinkedIn user, and we'll discuss it. That would be awesome. Yeah, I mean, look, it's the whole business of it could be economical. I suppose it is, but these are the pieces that we don't take risk on. It's just like, really, you're using Huawei equipment in GCHQ? I think we can afford the extra 20% uplift to buy Cisco or whatever it might be. So, shame on whoever made the decision if it included the economy, right? Included saving money on that. But I suspect it's political. I suspect that there is enough pressure through the United Nations and through all sorts of other alliances that people make that's how the decision was taking place. Also, it was around the same time that all those back doors were discovered. Do you remember this? This was about 7 or 8 years ago. And Cisco, Juniper, who else was on the hit list? There were a ton of people. This, I think, it might have been part of the Snowden leaks. I'll look it up in just a second to double check myself. But if it was part of those leaks, it revealed that these companies had put in the back door for the NSA, and the Brits might have felt burnt by that. Hey, not nearly as bad as having your number 2 in command as a Russian spy, but nevertheless, England. I don't know.
Well, I think we have to look at it from this perspective, right? And I think this is really important. When we study what's happening right now, and we look at what needs to be done from an industry perspective, we need to quantify the fact that we're dealing with a nation state with really unlimited resources and the ability to really trump you because of the resources, number one. And I think the second piece of that is most companies really don't stand a chance dealing with a nation state. I'd like to think that some companies do, but realistically, if a nation state puts their mind to something, they can. And a lot of companies think global, and they don't want to, create political drama. They're just trying to, make a business and generate revenue. And I think that's a really important part to think of there.
So that's right. On our Clubhouse that we were discussing yesterday, I was trying to make this point, and you actually articulated it a little bit better, because this is where I was saying, look, what about some kind of alliance? And I was making a comparison. So James had invited me into a clubhouse, and there was a bunch of CISOs and other folks there. We were kind of discussing this matter. And I said, well, look, how about an alliance? Look at NATO. I brought up the United Nations, but NATO being the main one, right? A strike against one of the NATO countries, it supposedly is a strike against all of them. So if there was an alliance, like Five Eyes, for example, that said, hey, if you, threat actor from some country or nation state rather, that's threaten one of us, you threaten all of us, and there is some kind of consequence to that. Now, James brought up the opposing view that NATO is not really working, and you're right. It's not. The US is the only one out of all the 27? No, there's something like 40, isn't there? However many countries in NATO, the US is the only one sticking to the agreement of 3% of the GDP. So the idea after World War II was to put 3% of our GDP into the NATO alliance so that we can arm ourselves and never go through that horrific century of the 20th century global wars again. Since then, everybody but one has negated on their commitment to pay, but they are all the beneficiaries of that alliance, right? They're all the beneficiaries of mostly the US military. So yeah, that hasn't worked well, but hey, let's do something that works well, because I still think it's a great idea. I still think if the good guys band together, then the bad and demonstrate to the bad guys that, look, if you do this, like steal our stuff, right, industrial espionage, cyber strikes against us, the consequence will be this amongst this entire group of countries. I'm just personally built that deterrent is the way to go, right, to stop these kinds of things from happening.
So I respect what you just said about NATO and the UN, and I'll politely disagree, because I think there's an aspect to it that is just it's a bunch of BS. It's a bunch of BS because the UN China has infiltrated parts of the UN to a point where it's made the UN ineffective. Same thing with Russia. I mean, when you have Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and China and Russia on the Human Rights Council.
Yeah. What's really disappointed me, and I want you to keep going with this point, James, because I'm going to add to it. What's really disappointed me is with the coronavirus, the World Health Organization cowing to what's happened in Wuhan. I mean, look, it is not a terrible thing to say. We need to have an investigation about the I don't think it's a bioweapons facility, but it's the facility in Wuhan where these kinds of labs exist to tinker around with things like viruses. There's nothing wrong with saying we need to have an actual inquiry. China's resisted that, and the WHO have just gone out and lied and basically said, yeah, no problem here, everybody. And also, they've gotten the WHO to not even say the word Taiwan, because China doesn't recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. And so the WHO, I remember this spokesperson from the WHO was asked by a female reporter. She was saying, well, what about Taiwan? Look how they've handled it. 'Cause they've had something like 9 deaths of coronavirus the entire year. This is where they're at right now. It's just incredible. And the WHO person replied by saying, China's handling it really well. So she asked again, specifically Taiwan, and the reply was, China's handling it really well. He was prepped to say, don't talk about Taiwan as an independent state. Yes, happy Paddy's Day, Patrick.
Happy St. Paddy's Day, Patrick. Good evening. I hope you're eating some corned beef and cabbage and enjoying a Guinness.
Anyway, so I'm adding to your sort of arsenal of dialogue there, my friend, and that is an issue for us, is the political influence that China has on the UN, WHO, etc.
That's why it won't work. That's why I think it needs to be something that comes from legislatures, gets enacted in a foreign policy, and then gets addressed through diplomacy. So the way to really curb an activity of a cyber threat is to, one, create a deterrent and make them think twice or 3 times before doing it. So like when they're sitting in the crapper, like LinkedIn user just so kindly noted, right? You make them think hard as they're pushing of, do they really want to do that? right?
That was great. Gotta love trolls. They bring us happiness.
Yeah, I love trolls, especially ones that hide behind anonymity, like Professor Don Lyons Fache with Chinese written in his name. So, yeah, I don't know if that's Chinese or Japanese. Either way, he's probably a CCP troll. But I don't mind. I'm banned from China, so I'll say what I have to say. And once we free China from the CCP, I'll be glad to go and visit all my friends again in Hong Kong and in China and spend time with them. But I will say that what's really interesting is when you look at how we create this deterrence, we do it by essentially making it difficult for businesses to do business there. So anytime to do a malign activity, we just limit the imports that can come in from that nation. So you essentially force business to reconsider who it does business with. They go, well, China's really malign on cyber. We can't really trust their manufacturing because our stuff's getting stuck and we're not able to serve our customers, and that's increasing the price of stuff at home. But the one thing about this country that I've come to realize is and people may disagree with me on this one, but I think this country, when it comes time to write out a hard time for the better of the country, we're willing to do it. And I think if we had honest leadership that came out and said, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, it might make things a little bit more expensive in the short term in your stores, but over the long term, it's going to be best for our country, our economy, our national security, and for our children's future. I think all of us would bite the bullet and be like, all right, so we're going to have, I don't need to buy a new TV. You know what? We'll make repairmen another job again, and people will fix stuff instead of throwing it away and putting it on another container ship that goes back to China that gets, decommissioned and then gets put back in new stuff, right?
Yeah, man, you're really hitting me in the heart on that one, because we and I'm guilty of this too quite often. My wife's better than me, and I feel a little ashamed about it. But it's like, the kid needs. I'm being sarcastic on this one. Bike tires are deflated. It's cheaper to just buy a new bike than it is a new pump. I mean, it's just so crazy, right? And we've gotten used to this. In my neighborhood, the first trash day of the month is bulk day. You should see the stuff people throw out. We have people driving from other neighborhoods like Newark and the such like to drive into our neighborhoods the night before bulk day gets picked up, because so much awesome stuff, furniture, TVs, is just sitting out on the front of people's driveways to be picked up and thrown away. So it's a beautiful point, James. I don't think people will swallow it. I think most people will just say, no, I want my new thing. Right.
I think that we will have about 10 or 15% of the population that would do what you said, and I think the other 80-85% would sit quietly and take it, especially because the way business moves today. And when you start kind of talking about doing something like this, a lot of companies are going to start looking at other places to do this stuff in, from a supply chain perspective. So look at it from a, people going to India or South America. And we saw that, by the way, with the tariffs that President Trump put on China. A lot of companies just reverted. They went to Mexico. They went to Nicaragua. They went to, Honduras and all these different nations. And they were like, okay, we'll make clothes here because you know what? It's cheaper and we're able to get it to the States without having to put it on a boat. And here we go.
Right.
So,
in actual fact, these things often are not that much more. There's a chap who wrote a wonderful book. Jocko Willink wrote this book called Extreme Ownership. He owns a jeans company somewhere on the East Coast here. I forget the name of it. I wish I remember, because I'd love to give him a shout out. And
Jocko, you're talking about lions, not sheep?
That might be another book he wrote. He wrote Extreme Ownership. It was an amazing book. Former Navy SEAL. Right? Yeah.
I'll tell you the name of his website here.
Yeah, he also owns a clothing company on the East Coast, somewhere north of Connecticut, I think, and makes jeans. And so I ordered myself a pair because there's months and months waiting list. They're really good quality jeans. They are a lot more expensive than I would normally pay for a pair of jeans, like $150. To me, that's really expensive for a pair of jeans. I would typically pay like $80. But you know what? It's made in America. I love Jocko. I love the story behind these things. I'm sure the quality is going to be a lot better. I've got friends that have bought them that, adhere to all of the rumors on quality being excellent. It's just like, fine, I'll buy these jeans. So and if you think about when the US turned from, the beginning of the Second World War, coming out of the Great Depression, England slowly, or at that point, rapidly losing its foothold as the global superpower. And then you had the 50s and 60s and America took over. What happened in those 50s and 60s? I love to say this, Levi jeans and Mustangs. It's the big export, right? As a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s of England, all you wanted to do was have a pair of Levi jeans. I mean, that was it, right? You were American if you could get your hands on a pair of Levi jeans. And then you had wonderful other iconic things. Now, they started to be manufactured in China by this point, of course, but Nike Air Jordans. It was like, wow, Nike Air Jordans, this is so American. Now, the manufacturing had shifted by that point, but my point is 50s and 60s, you saw insane growth in the United States and stuff was being manufactured here. So there must be an economist with a PhD that can certainly say, yes, if we did this for a short period of time, it would be more expensive, but then economies of scale would kick in, and those $150-odd jeans you bought, Eddie, would now be your $80 that you wanted them for in the first place. I would imagine it would go like that, but I'm an economist.
Listen, I'm in a conundrum on this one, and it's something that I think is going to require a lot more debate on the town square. But I want to bring up a funny story, and it's funny. It's kind of off topic, but it's funny. And I think in the 15 minutes we have left on the show, we should talk about something funny.
All right.
So this is the headline. A high schooler and her mom hacked the school records to steal the homecoming queen election, according to police.
So important. What screams out at me at that is they've got the intelligence to hack, but not quite the intelligence to hack the right thing.
So, J.M. Tate High School in Contamont, Florida, essentially was the victim of a cyber breach that was done by a 17-year-old senior and her mom, who's 50, who were arrested and charged with fraudulently accessing confidential student information, according to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. According to the complaint, the mom, who works in the school system, had admin access, and her daughter manipulated her mom's admin access to essentially hack her school and change the votes so she would become homecoming queen.
Well, you know what? Great preparation for politics. That girl's going to be president one day. Man.
According to the report, the daughter openly used the login that her mom had to access school district records. And she was bragging about that to students, 9 of which who signed an affidavit saying that she's bragged about being able to hack in and change grades and do all kinds of stuff.
That's how most criminals are caught, by the way. Tattletales and people just bragging, right? It's just can't keep their mouth shut. What else does it say? This is great.
Oh, this is brilliant. Apparently the mom knew this was going on because she was getting pinged every time her daughter logged into her account, but did nothing about it.
Oh, man. There was a famous...
Now, here's the thing. So what's the crime here? She accessed school records unauthorized. I get that.
Or what's the unethical thing? The unethical thing is deception and lying, obviously. But actual crime, well, she used somebody else's admin rights, but is that a crime? It's wrong. Yeah, what are the police going to prosecute them with?
They're prosecuting them with the charges, illegal entry into unauthorized entry, fraudulent, charged with fraudulently accessing confidential student information. That's the charge.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because what are you going to charge her with? Like theft of the prom queen, like homecoming queen from.
Give me that tiara.
You're stripped of your queenhood, of your queenship.
That's actually probably the law that Reagan instituted after watching the computer game movie. Remember, if you break into somebody's home, it's like breaking somebody's computer, it's like breaking into their home, right? Part of the castle law there. I forget the name of it. So that's probably what they're charging them with. But how incredulous is this? You know you're not the homecoming queen, but you somehow are going to feel good about lying that you're the homecoming queen.
Well, that's very narcissistic. That's very narcissistic. That's the entitlement issue that goes on there. And the mom, like the person who's guilty here really is the mom for raising such a shitty daughter.
Yeah.
And allowing her daughter to just do whatever.
Yeah. And even at 17, 18 years old, your prefrontal cortex isn't fully wired up yet. I'm not giving excuses, right? But, I think culpability lies heavily with the mother. Let's see what happens, because remember, what was that, McCarthy, what was that lady who, she did a little bit of jail time or community service for changing her kids' SAT scores or helping them get into university? What was that scandal in 2019? Right, and so the mom ended up doing. I think she's a celebrity of some kind. Ended up doing a community service there, and I don't know what happened to the kids. Although they were running a racket, I think they were doing this for a fair few people, right? But there you go. Maybe that kid's also going to use some CGI to make her look like the homecoming queen, since she didn't get it in the first place. Now that's a little mean. But
this is a crime that I'm seriously concerned about. I'm glad our law enforcement is, dealing with these kinds of cases nowadays. Because there's no crime going on anywhere. We got to go after a 17-year-old who accessed the computer system and really changed the votes so that she would become, homecoming queen. That to me is just. I saw this story today, and a bunch of cyber folks were commenting on it, going like, this is unethical, this is despicable. And I'm like, slow down, laugh this out, guys. Literally laugh this out. It's not like she was a master hacker. This is just same old credential taken and just plugging in.
Laptop open, yeah. Well, maybe there's a lot of people in the cyber community who didn't get to be homecoming queen. I don't know. Right?
I'm sure there's a good portion of it, but it's funny. I think one of the one of the funny comments here is people taking it kind of why we need digital safety skills and insider threats, and I'm like, okay, homecoming queen. That's the vote she flipped. You guys are more freaked out about this than some of the questions that were raised in November about the presidential election.
Right.
Just saying. Let's talk about insider threat.
Right.
Yeah, that's just dude, I can't help it. I'm laughing. I saw this story today and I was like, I'm gonna leave it for the last of the show, because I feel like it's this whole idea of being caught in an echo chamber. It's very difficult to be in an echo chamber. And in cyber, we all live in an echo chamber. We speak to other cyber folks, we rehash, and we talk about all these different things. But really, what we need to do, what's urgently needed for us to do is get out of our echo chamber, start looking at our problems a little differently, and start really trying to find the right partners that we need in order to fix them. And I think that's the challenge that's ahead of us right now. Isn't, because we can't do it all on our own. We can't. It's not realistic. Most CISOs don't report to the CEO. I think a handful do. You're screened before you're able to speak. So let's address the elephant in the room and say, well, we need to address this differently. We need to really solve this problem.
I think as the vaccine rolls out and people start going back to work, I'm seeing more cars in the parking lot of the train station right now, right? I've got a direct train line to Manhattan. So people are starting to get back out there. That will help break people's bubble to a small extent, because I think the echo chamber problem was accelerated due to the lockdown. And the challenge with the echo chamber is you don't know. I mean, how do you know if you're being deceived? It's kind of what an echo chamber is. It's a sort of a deception. It's a bubble of information that just keeps getting pounded back to you, right? How do you know if you're deceived? It's like a little saying, deceived, who, me? No. Like, well, that's the point. And so, the algorithms, we've spoken about this a little bit ad nauseum on our show, right? We did a course, and for the listeners, go back to have a look at a couple of episodes on the social dilemma. But the algorithms that continue to push the same information back to us, that's unhealthy, right? Here's a little test on this. So most people have Netflix, and you've got your profile set up. And so, people are just so bored of Netflix today, because guess what? They've been sitting home for the last 12 months and there's no new content being produced. So people have pretty much finished all of Netflix. If you go into somebody else's profile, all of a sudden you'll be like, look at all these shows. I've never seen all these shows on Netflix. So choose somebody else's profile, your wife's profile, a kid's profile, and you will see shows that you would have to really dig for on your profile, because your profile is reflecting back to you shows that you typically like to watch. It's super refreshing. But that's the point of the echo chamber, right? Is to try and jump into somebody else's chamber. That might be interesting as an exercise.
Yeah, I'm going to do a post tomorrow on LinkedIn on the echo chamber, and I'll tag you in it.
Yeah.
I think it's important we have that discussion, and I think it's a really cool discussion for next week, right? Let's talk about the echo chamber and kind of stepping outside of it, because
all right,
I'm a firm believer. I was in a clubhouse room before we went on the show today with the great Dr. Ron Paul. It was his first ever clubhouse room.
Ron Paul, the politician, Ron Paul?
Yeah, Ron Paul, the politician, the former congressman, the father of Rand Paul, the senator.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to have listened to that. That's cool. What were you guys talking about?
So, it was just a general conversation around the current kind of climate and the libertarian movement and the constitutionalist and the federalist movements and so forth. And very, 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 very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
There are a few people in there that, I would say that knowing them from Twitter, and I knew him from Twitter, I'd be like, we would probably never be able to exchange ideas. And then here we are in Clubhouse, we're in the same room and we're all on stage.
Interesting.
And now we're sharing stuff and we're having debate. And that's encouraging in a lot of ways, because I heard things that weren't being interpreted by media, but rather from these people themselves. And I was able to ask questions to get, ask follow-up questions to get to probe, to understand the mindset. And it really did bring me up on a few issues that I see that, are oftentimes, I want to say, downplayed, but really do have an impact. And I think that's something very important to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, well, do that. Put some links up on LinkedIn tomorrow. I'll do the same thing as well, and I'll mention you. And here's what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to put a LinkedIn survey together, and I'm going to ask people to jump into another profile on Netflix. I know this sounds kind of silly, but it was really enlightening to the fact that the algorithms are just pushing content that I like back to me. And when I saw somebody else's profile, it blew me away, because there was just so much other content. And then what I'll do is I'll do another survey before the town square next week to say, what did you think, right, of the people who did that? So that'll be super interesting, and hopefully people will jump onto the town square and join us in the dialogue as well.
So I want to say a few things before we end today's show, because we're almost out of time.
Right.
One, if you're on Clubhouse, you can look for our club, the CISO Talk Podcast Club. That's from the CISO Talk Podcast Club. We launched at Tech Town Square. We do the Cyber Couch on Fridays. We did our first Cyber Couch last week. That was a blast. I know that on LinkedIn, you get to hear us chat and you kind of comment here and there on Clubhouse. You guys come on stage. We have fun conversations. Last night we were on in a room that I had scheduled for an hour. We ended up going almost 2 hours and 10 minutes. Great people came on. Eddie was in there for a little while. David Vaughn, me and him kind of started that room, and it was really funny. And it was just kind of like a random cyber conversation. We really kind of had very little, just let a conversation develop and sharing stories and talking about stuff. And so, also very interesting to do that, because again, David Vaughn, who I'd like to say very good friends. Him and I disagree on a lot of different things, but we're able to have it in such a way where, we still hug it out and we love each other and, would be there for one another. And I think that's important. So if you're not on Clubhouse and you need an invite, DM me on LinkedIn, James J. Azar, and I'll get you on. The folks over at Clubhouse have been really generous with me. They keep giving me passes as I keep bringing people on. And if you are on Clubhouse, you can look up the CISO Talk podcast room. We'll be live on Friday again at, I believe, 4 p.m. this week. I believe it's 4 p.m. this week. Yeah, because of daylight savings, we're moving to 4 p.m. And we just lost Eddie for whatever reason. So that's really weird. I think Eddie may have hit the leave studio button there. And now he's talking to himself in the green room, which is
okay. That was strange. All right.
You're Eddie. You're kicked out. Do you live in your crapper, Eddie? Do you, Eddie? Do you?
Okay, fantastic. Not sure what happened there. Let me finish up with 30 seconds and pass it back to you, James. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for starting a little bit late today. I had a LinkedIn snafu. It's kind of funny because I saw a post that I thought was aged from previous weeks. And so I thought, what's that doing in my LinkedIn? Got rid of it about an hour before the show. In actual fact, it was James's post. So there you go. That's what caused a little bit of a disruption. But now we know, and this is how we find out. It's actually the beauty of this gig economy. Because you think about companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, all these gigantic organizations, it is a user remediated process. I mean, if you think about businesses of the past, you would have had armies of staff going out and marching to teach people, think about Xerox, how to use these photocopy machines. Today, people launch applications and it's a self-serve smorgasbord of let's go figure it out for ourselves. I actually love it from that perspective. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, that we kicked off a little bit late, but definitely join us next week because we will consistently be here at 8 p.m. Eastern time every Wednesday night, and join us at the Clubhouse, as James was saying, this coming Friday at 4 Eastern.
Yeah, you definitely want to be with us on Clubhouse. You definitely want to subscribe to the YouTube channel and get in on all the action. And that's it for us here today, guys. We'll be ending. We'll give you about a minute back to your evening. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Thanks so much for being part of the program. And we'll talk to you guys again next week or Friday on Clubhouse. Take care.
Okay, beauty. Bye-bye.